eLTER, Integrated European Long-Term Ecosystem, Critical Zone, and Socio-Ecological Research.
My name is Blaise Denfeld. I'm the SPF lead, and along with Terry, we welcome you to the SPF webinar. And today it will be on data papers. And we should say this is the last webinar for this year, and we're working on the additional webinar series for next year. So we'll soon have more information about that for you. But today we're going to talk about data papers, and Terry's going to introduce our speakers.
Yeah, so today we have Tanja Lindholm and Allan Souza, both from University of Helsinki. Tanja is working as a project planner, especially with the biological stations. And she has worked quite a lot with different data aspects of the sites, data coming from the sites. And Allan is a postdoc, and he has also a data stewardship education, quite recent degree on that. And Tanja will first give an overview of what is it to publish a data paper, and then Allan will tell about the practical how did I do it for my data set example type of presentation. And with that, Tanja, I think we can get started.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. And hello from from Kilpisjärvi. So I mentioned to Terhi and Blaise and those who joined early on that we quite often freeze for 10 seconds. So just bear with me, and that's a normal procedure. And hopefully we don't have any power cuts or anything like this. And so I'm involved, as Terhi said, with many different stations, but mainly focusing, different parts from different station and work with the long-term legacy data in different stations. And so I'm going to give you an overview. I'm not going to give you any answers, direct answers to anything, but kind of what I've learned from my experience and bit like what I tend to do at the stations with the legacy data. And then I think it would be good. My presentation will take like 20-30 minutes, something like this. So, and then Allan is going to give the practical view. So maybe we can take the questions at the end, so we can both answer the questions. Of course, if you have something emerging and you are in a rush, then of course we can take questions in between. But so I'm going to go a bit like what the data papers are, why, touch a bit about the topic when, and talk a little bit about the value of the data, and then how to choose, like what are the different aspects of choosing a journal. So this topic was data papers, but it could have been data publications or data articles, and it's pretty much the same thing. So they all are peer-reviewed articles, similar to scientific articles. I think I took this manuscript composition. I think it was Earth System Science data, but it follows the exact same structure. But the difference is that it's not focusing on the scientific outcomes, but rather on the focus on describing the data. And as in a kind of a normal article, the data is also published separately in a repository, and then it gets its own persistent identifier and a citation. And some papers have some dedicated repositories, where they kind of, you don't have to put it there, but they kind of guide you to put your data in a certain place. But other than that, it's a similar process. with the difference that many of the journals actually curate the data in the process. And I think this is one of the major benefits. And then there are different, I think there's a big diversity of the papers where you can actually publish this kind of data paper. These what I've mentioned here, and I think Allan had pretty much similar papers in his presentation. But these, for example, just focus solemnly on the publishing the data paper, and at least some of these curate the data in the process. But there's plenty of papers, and then you can publish a data paper within an article series, but then it might not be that the data is curated in the similar way. But I'll come back to the kind of how to choose and so on. And then why, as I mentioned, of course, if the data is curated in the process, that's fantastic. And that's kind of my focus and what I really wish. But then the other one is, especially with the legacy data, there's never, I think there's always a word limit in like a normal article. So you might have 250 words to describe the method. And if you think about legacy data, if I think about, for example, from Lammi biological station, where we have 70 years, well, not always, but, you know, we might have 70 years of the data. And of course, the methods and equipment has changed over the time. And then if you think about the scope, just the scientific outcome, you can't really describe this in detail. For example, there might be differences that water samples nowadays are taking once a month, and maybe when they started, it was once a day, and it was a combination of different days. And then if you think about the laboratory equipment, those has, of course, changed over the time. So I think this is one of the great benefits of the data paper, that you can actually describe the quality and the methods of the data in really in detail. And then another thing that I think is super important as well is that you can actually credit people who work in the field. So it's, of course, you can in a scientific article give credit, but maybe that's not the place. But with the data or data publication, you can actually credit the people in the field. And in my point of view, I think that will also increase the quality of the data. So if you are part of the publication, I think you actually spend more time in the detail in the field, because, you know, sometimes you feel that maybe I'll just take a shortcut here and do this a little bit easy way. But when you're part of the scientific process, I think you understand a little bit better why you actually need to follow the protocols into a certain detail. And then I mentioned this this curation process. I think there's a lot of good checklists within the data papers about, you know, different procedures and what you can publish and what you can't publish and what you need to consider. And then you kind of, well, I think this is that a lot of researchers feel that you have done your research and the paper is ready, and then the publisher asks you to publish the data, and it's just like, oh my God, do I need to do this? And then you kind of dump it just somewhere and are a bit lost. So I think within, you know, in this kind of process, it's possible to avoid this kind of a situation. And then, of course, you get more visibility always, you know, and I think there's so much legacy data that one person can't come up with all the ways you can actually use the data. And then part of this process, when it's also curated, I think it increases the interoperability and reusability of the data, and of course the scientific transparency with the detailed quality. explanations. And then when, well, this is, we had this similar kind of event a couple of weeks ago in Finland, where we heard different researchers describing how they had done. And actually, we had three different cases. So one was that they had a project, and their aim at the beginning was that they are going to make a data publication. So they did all this in the detail actually when they were collecting the data, and it was quite easy. That was, it was at the beginning of the process, and this is how we're going to do that. And then it's of course really, really simple, but at least stations I work for, we are not into that, we are working with the legacy data, and there was one person who also mentioned that they came up quite late in the process with the idea of the data publication, and they also they collected data from another institute and from the papers, and then what came that you didn't necessarily they didn't collect all the necessary metadata from the beginning, but at the end of the project, and then it was quite a lot of work. They were really, really happy. But it's kind of, if you ever have any kind of, if you digitize any papers, that anything, and something feels that this is not necessary information, yes, it is. So it's much easier when you start going through something to do it in the beginning. Of course, with the legacy data, we are where we are. And then there was a third presentation where they actually took the data from a certain repository, and they curated the data again. And I can't remember what was the percentage of the data that was absolutely unusable because of the lack of the proper metadata. So there are different kind of cases. So when, of course, if you start a project and you feel that your data is something that should be published through a data publication, think about the process and take the approach from the beginning before going here. And then I took this value of the data, and I, of course, eLTER sites. Well, we do have social data as well, but I look at I'm a biologist and geologist, so I look at scientific data. So I think the value of our data, especially the legacy data, we tick all these boxes. So there's always, it's unique. You can't go back. If you measure a temperature today, you can't go back to that like on the previous one. So it's unique data. There's so many different ways how you can use the data, and the amount of resources we have used just collecting the data is quite massive. And then, of course, it has an impact to the society, being an environmental scientist. And I took this from the work we did. It's published in Tanja. It's just a PowerPoint presentation, like how you can improve the quality and impact of your research through data management. So there's quite a nice, if anyone's interested, I think there's quite a nice definitions, about vocabulary, for example, and so on. And then I mentioned that we had this previous couple of weeks ago, this similar kind of event, and I learned a lot from that. And I think I understand a little bit better personally how I would choose a data journal. So there are several different aspects. So for example, this and some of the things are if you try to find a proper repository. So this goes, this is similar to that, it's kind of whether the journal is discipline specific or it's general. With the repository, I think the recommendation is quite often that you should choose discipline specific repository over the general, but of course it depends on the case. And same goes with the different papers. So you have, and Allan is going to give an example about the biodiversity data that of course has a certain focus. And with the biodiversity data, I would take that route. But maybe with something else, you would rather take a general, like for example, the Nature paper, scientific data. And as I mentioned, some of the journals have kind of like a scientific data has room in space in fixture or something, and that might be a beneficial if they guide towards some kind of repository. But this is not really often the case. And then, well, I'd go to the journal impact factor first. So, well, of course, we all notice that this is how we are evaluated. But then it might be that, if it has a really, really high impact factor, it usually goes that it's really, really slow and long process. And in the same go, it might be that actually the journal that has the highest impact factor doesn't necessarily curate the data. And these are kind of the choices that you're kind of juggling between, that what you want and what is the outcome. And someone told me that that they felt that if they publish in a high impact factor that is that has a kind of focus on an audience, that maybe people find their paper easier. But I kind of disagree with that a little bit. That and maybe I'm wrong, but at least if I search something, I'm not going to a publisher or to certain paper and see what they have published. I just do the search in Google or our library systems, and then it really shouldn't matter, whether it's kind of focused on a certain audience or not. It should be, it's kind of indexed in a similar way. So you should actually find it no matter kind of where you have published the data paper. So, and then, well, this is kind of similar when you choose any kind of journal. Are they open access, not open access? This relates to the costs as well, maybe, and what licenses they produce. And of course, we all want open access journals that is globally open for everyone, not just, for example, the European Society. And then costs. Well, there are journals that have really, really high impact factor. I'm not going to advertise any of the papers. So if you want, you can ask me after the recording. So there is one paper that has really, really high impact factor, and it costs 0. And then I think there's another journal that has really, really high impact factor, and it's really expensive. So it's kind of choices you make along the way. And of course, it might be that you feel that your data is so important that you want the high impact factor, but then you need to keep in mind that that might take a long time, and that might also mean that data is not curated in the process. And this is something that I'm not sure whether they actually say it, whether it's curated or not. And it might be just the case by case. But it's kind of, if you know anyone who has published in some kind of data paper, ask them how the process was and how it went. And I think this is still the only way you can learn, is talk to your colleagues and ask around, you know, how to do and how to choose a journal. So as I said, I'm not going to give you any answers, maybe more questions, but this was my general part, and I'm happy to answer all the questions. And you can also contact me if you want to ask afterwards, you know, if you have any questions. So I'm happy to answer through email as well. Let's move on to Allan.
Okay, yeah, and we can take more questions at the end. So if you have some questions for Tanja, bring them up after Allan's done.
Okay, so I'll share my screen. I think you are able to see it. No?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Yes. Well, oh, sorry. So I will make a short presentation, but that will be open for answering questions if some emerge. So I was invited to talk about my own experience in publishing data papers. And for that, I have to focus on the ones that I have some experience, and more specifically, I will focus on the biodiversity data journal. So you can see this presentation as like a brief introduction to biodiversity data overall, and then some really specific points that are unique to biodiversity data journal. That is one of the data paper journals that exists in environmental science. So this is a brief outline of the presentation that I will just say something that is somehow similar to what Tanja was already mentioning, where I will talk about the significance of data papers for biodiversity data sets, and I will tell a little bit about my experience in publishing data papers, and focus on some details and facts and specificities of biodiversity data journal, and mention the peer review process that I've been through, and then I will talk to you about the lessons I have learned during this process. So data papers specifically oriented to biodiversity data sets are really important because they are actually coming from a very diverse type of data sets. So if you are dealing with biological data, you can have different taxa coming from different ecosystem biomes, different geolocations, and also other environmental data are also very varied. So you have several different types of data that are collected. So these data are usually, as Tanja mentioned before, costly to collect, not only economically, because we know how it costs to go to the field and collect the data every season or month or whatever, but also it has some ecological costs on the community that you are sampling, and also the ethical concerns if you are sampling biological data. And then it should be also taken into account when you are processing this data. So this makes the value of the data much more deep than we just usually look at it. So there are several layers of concerns regarding the costs of collecting biodiversity data sets. So that's why it's important to allow further use of these data sets that we are collecting, besides the use that most of us do when we are collecting the data that is to publish a research manuscript, and that's gone. So the idea is to actually empower the use of this data set that was collected for that specific purpose. But in a way, if you are making this data available, you are actually working towards the preservation of knowledge in an accessible and understandable way for future uses by the scientific community and also managers. So another important thing regarding this is that we have a different type of scientific output, because data papers has some difference regarding the structure and the outcomes that are coming from this, and they are slightly different from research papers, the normal research papers that we have. So this is important to highlight the necessity, I would say, to actually work towards publishing data papers. So even though we are talking about this subject, this is a relatively new type of scientific output, at least in environmental sciences. So there is the first, so I just select a few, 4 data journals, data paper journals, and the oldest publication that exists date 2009. So we are dealing with 14 years of existence of these data papers. So, and most of them start in the last decade. So we are now maybe in the phase of maturation of this type of scientific output. So regarding my own experience with data papers, so overall, I was working as a normal researcher for many years, and my first normal scientific publication happened in 2007. So quite long time ago, and more or less in the same time that data papers were emerging. But recently, I started to change my focus in the career towards data. As Terry mentioned before, I recently concluded a post-graduation course on data stewardship. So I am slowly moving towards focusing on data, scientific data outputs overall. So regarding data papers, my experience is not that large. So I am not like the ancient from the previous experienced research from the previous slide, but more like a young adventurous researcher in this field. So my first publication was in 2022 and was in Data in Brief, and now I have one data paper is currently under review on the Biodiversity Data Journal. So that is the journal that I will focus on this presentation. So I will briefly give you some journal facts. I bet I am not paid by this Biodiversity Journal whatsoever. It's just to show some facts about this vehicle of publication. So the first publication on this journal happens in 2013. The publisher is Pensov, which is a Bulgarian publisher. It has as a model of publication open access, so it's good in this respect. Last year, they published 236 papers, which is quite a lot. It's around 20 publications per month on average. And they had 1,437 citations last year. So the impact factor from Clarivate is 1.3. I know that is not so large, but still is good, and maybe in the future will become larger as other data journals that exist. And so there is the journal is classified in the quartile 3, Q3 currently, but let's hope that it will improve in the future. But this doesn't mean that the quality of the journal is bad whatsoever. On the contrary, it's really good. So this journal publishes a myriad of types of papers. That they are not publishing only data papers. They are publishing several different sources of papers. So data paper is one of the several outputs that they publish every year. So there are general data papers, there are omics data papers that are specific to this field. There are methods paper, R packages or Python packages, software description, interactive identification keys that they actually provide some templates to use. There are normal research articles that are not focused on data itself, but maybe related to data issues, but not actually presenting the data set or providing a new data set. There are also taxonomy and inventory papers, species conservation profiles, alien species profile, editorial, short communication, commentary, and forum papers. So you see, there's really a lot of different research outputs from this single data journal. So here is a nice infographic that is actually present in their website, where they are actually showing some differences or like the process of publishing in their journal. So here it's good to highlight that they have some specific things that are related to their writing tool. So they actually require that the paper is written through the ARPA writing tool. So this is going through the website. So they do not accept Word, LaTeX, or other similar data formats. In other words, you actually have to build the data paper on their platform. And for that, you need to invite your co-authors and contributors, and they all can build the paper collaboratively. So this is some kind of difference. I know that it exists in other journals as well, but this is the system that they are adopting. And to be honest, it was not difficult to use at all. And they have a lot of help in their platform, so it's quite easy to go through and build the paper nicely. And then they also have in place some checks on if some session is missing or whatsoever. So they notify you, and you have to improve it and to fix it. So in essentially, it's an interactive way, and it's a centralized place where you host your under development data paper. So it's kind of similar to other tools that allows collaborative work in Word documents. There are several tools available in this regard. And also there are also different types of information regarding the reviewing and publishing, and they are all connected to the publication system of this journal, and you have more in-depth description of those things in their website. So here I will just try to just give a brief summary on the data publishing guidelines that I found that are really important for people that are starting or thinking at publishing data papers in this journal. So the first thing, that the data must be publicly available. So there is they do not allow that the data is not publicly available when you are submitting your paper. Also, this is quite relevant that they are mandating that the data should be machine readable from the start. So you should consider that the goal of this is to allow harvest and further use of this data, and these things are usually done programmatically. So for that reason, it's important to allow the data to be machine readable. So this is mandatory in this journal. And data should be deposited in thematic repositories, as Tanja was mentioned before. So this is the preference of the journal. So they mentioned several different thematic repositories, such as GBIF, NCBI, GeneBank, Pangea, Treebase, MorphBank, and so on. And when there is not such a thematic repository that has a good match with your data set, it can be deposited in general purpose repositories as well, such as Zenodo, Dryad, Dataverse, and so on. So in essence, they actually advocate for use of thematic repositories, but is not 100% necessary to submit your data set to a thematic repository if you are not very sure if it should go to one or the other. So you could deposit the data set in some more general repository. Another interesting thing that they have listed in the data publishing guidelines is that they accept multimedia data like sounds, photographs, and videos These data should be deposited at repositories, but for this specific type of data, they also allow that the data could be deposited as supplementary material for the paper. But it also depends on the size of the data set that we are talking to. So regarding the peer reviews, as mentioned before, there's kind of a curation that goes into this process. So I can say that the peer review system is split in two phases. The first phase is the peer review of the data set, where the curation happens. So in this part of the peer review process, they are actually looking at your data set and see if you are using the proper data formats, if the data is organized in a proper way, and if it's using proper vocabulary and ontologies. So they actually go through the data set and ask you to change things on the data set, sometimes including new variables, sometimes deleting variables, or merging or changing the format of the data entered in some variables. So this is quite in detail peer review process that actually contributes a lot to the quality of the data set afterwards. So you can expect to go through this phase of peer review of your data set, and after it's completed, it is forwarded to the journal editor, and then it goes through a normal peer review process on the paper itself, not on the data sets. So, and for that they have different types of peer review. That is the normal one, where community or like the other peers actually are invited to review your paper and then give feedback, and this feedback is visible there on their website. And they also allow you to choose if you want to have your peer review made by the public. So in this option, you can allow everyone that is registered in their platform to review your paper on a voluntary basis. So you can actually choose. So this journal has more options regarding the peer review system than normally is found in other vehicles of publications. So to finalize, I just want to say that the lessons that I learned from when I was submitting a data paper for this journal. So it is really important to make good care of your data formats. So by that I mean the type of extension on your data file, and also how the data is organized and structured. And also it's really important to use proper vocabularies that are pertinent and have some identifiers that can be easily understandable by the machine. So then they actually ask me to use Darwin Core or EMFTES tools to make the proper variable names more correct and accurate to the point that that would be understandable by machines. And regarding eLTER, EMFTES is a thesaurus from eLTER, so it's a good source of information regarding the proper vocabularies that could be used in data papers that emerge in the future, hopefully many, from eLTER data sets. And also it was really interesting to learn that there are a lot of different repositories with specific thematic or themes, and it's really important to try to look around and see what are the repositories that could fit your data. So it's an important lesson that I think that should be good to explore the different repositories as much as you can and see how your data actually fits into one of those. And if you don't know, you can always ask for help to colleagues and other people that have more experience on that. Another lesson that is important that I think is that the building the paper is slightly different than normal because you need to do it online and you have to use this ARPA writing tool. So if you want to save time, just go directly there to start your papers building, you don't need to provide a Word file or LaTeX or whatever. So you can skip this phase and start building through the platform straight away. Another important thing that I think is good to make a remark is that it is a scientific paper after all. It's a different type of scientific output and different scientific paper, but it has a peer review system and quality control mechanisms in place. So you can expect a lot of double checking, triple checking, and very important questions to be asked about your data sets. So with that, it's important to mention that it requires a lot of effort from the authors to build these data papers. So you can see as a different output, but one that will require also effort. So publishing data papers is not an easy route to follow through if you are not if you're expecting an easy path on that, do not. But on the other hand, it's not as impossible as it might seem. It's actually a rewarding process that you learn a lot through the process. So because it requires a different type of knowledge that we are usually applying when we are writing scientific manuscripts. So it requires knowledge on data organization and data standards. So overall, this actually when you are trying to make a data paper, you learn a lot through the process, and hopefully you're gonna start applying the same procedures that you learn during the process of submission and in your future research. So in this way, it's quite rewarding that you actually add new type of knowledge on top of your own, and then you can make more out of your research outputs later on in a more qualified and standardized way. So I think that was all that I have to say, and I will be glad to take questions if something exists.